I'm the founder of the Awake Network, and I'm so happy you're joining us for this special live teaching, Compassion as a Source of Happiness, Joy, and Resilience, with one of my favorite teachers, Thupten Jinpa. As we're all arriving and settling in, please take a moment in the chat or comment section to go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. It's really nice to get a feel of everyone who's joining us today. And it always feels so powerful having so many people come together to do a practice like compassion. So it's really nice to get a sense of that together. It feels like we're forming a sort of invisible network of compassion practitioners from all over the world. So we can touch into that for a moment. We're so lucky to have Thupten Jinpa guiding us. Jinpa doesn't really need much of an introduction, but I can't help but highlight a few of his many accomplishments here. Jinpa has a special ability to bridge both Eastern and Western, ancient and modern approaches to cultivating compassion. And he has a unique background serving as the principal English translator to His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 1985. He was trained as a monk at the Tsartse College of Grandin Monastic University and also holds a BA in philosophy and a PhD in religious studies from Cambridge University. He's also the principal creator of the Compassion Cultivation Training, which he developed while at Stanford in 2009, and which is now offered through the Compassion Institute, which he co-founded in 2017. In addition to the Compassion Institute's traditional 8-week training, Jinpa has also just finished creating a new shorter 2-week online class, Building Compassion from the Inside Out, to support people in all walks of life in discovering more meaning, purpose, and joy in their lives through compassion training. Thank you so much for being with us, Jinpa.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to go over a few more details. Thank you to everyone who wrote in for our pre-call survey. It was very touching to read all of your questions, and that's definitely helped to inform the tone of the call today. A little bit more about the schedule. Jinpa will begin by giving a talk and leading us in a guided compassion practice. And about 35 or 40 minutes past the hour, we'll be taking live Q&A from all of you. And Jinpa's excited to hear your questions, what challenges and inspirations are coming up for you. So please don't be shy with your questions. When we get to that section, I'll also be giving further details about how that will all work. And after the Q&A, I'm really excited to say that we'll have a few minutes to hear from Jinpa about his upcoming online course, Building Compassion from the Inside Out, as the next cohort will be starting in just under a week. And that'll be a wonderful opportunity for anyone who's interested in studying further with Jinpa or deepening their practice in compassion. So to finish, I'll just say that obviously there are many ongoing challenges and difficulties for so many of us right now. And at the same time, I've personally been really amazed by how powerful it can be when I'm able to just touch in and feel whatever it is that I'm actually feeling or what someone else might be feeling. And it feels like it opens a sort of wellspring of love and care when I'm able to actually do that. So Jinpa, personally, so grateful to have you here speaking to us today on this theme of compassion as a source of happiness, joy, and resilience. I'll let you take it away from here. Thank
you. First of all, I would like to thank the Awake Network and you, Kaylee, and your team for really, hosting this with the Compassion Institute. And really, one of the things that I have tried to do in my life is to really, as much as possible, further the mission of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whom I have had the privilege to serve for such a long time, and the promotion of compassion in a more universal way, with a grounding in common human experience, and also invoking appreciation of basic human condition that is shared universally, is something that His Holiness has dedicated a lot of his work. So to have this opportunity once again to share some of my thoughts and be together with a group of people who are all kind of, inspired by the idea of bringing more compassion in the world. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. So today's topic is really about how can we look at and understand compassion as a source of joy and resilience. And this is particularly poignant now, today, when many of us went through a long period of COVID. In fact, the whole world went through a long period of COVID isolation. And we are kind of partially out and not fully there. And many of us are feeling, as human beings, kind of quite fragile. When you feel fragile and vulnerable, there's also an element of kind of brittleness that builds up. And when we are brittle, we become irritable. And then when you are irritable, then the tiniest thing really kind of, destabilizes you, just, sort of undermines your equilibrium. So this is a universal human experience. And in this situation, I think one of the most important things that each one of us can do is to find a way to turn our own mind into an ally towards healing, towards connection, towards reaching out, and towards moving beyond isolation and loneliness. And here, we can learn something from the teachings of His Holiness and Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, how to do that. So to use our own mind as an ally. And tapping into particularly the power of compassion is a very important one, because compassion is a natural human quality. We all possess it. Dispositionally, some people may be more explicitly empathetic, some less so. But the capacity to care, the capacity to take interest in someone else's, the problem of someone else other than yourself, the capacity to connect and love is a universal, quality. It's not something that we have to learn from religion or philosophy or other teachings. It's a natural human, biologically given trait that is part of our evolutionary makeup. But tapping into that part of who we are can really be a powerful skill and approach in this particular time when we are feeling vulnerable and when mental well-being is becoming a really important issue. And even individually, some of us may feel that we're kind of okay, we're resilient, but there are many people in our life who may be feeling more vulnerable, who may need more helping hand. So being able to tap into our own power of compassion to reach out and connect can be a really constructive and creative and powerful strategy. So the connection between compassion and resilience is something that has been noticed and appreciated in the Buddhist teachings for a long, long time. In fact, out of the four immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, compassion is associated with resilience, because when you tap into your natural compassion, you become more courageous. So compassion, in Buddhist language, compassion is referred to as that human quality that protects us against what is called weariness. Now, weariness is a term, mikyoa, is very close to what we today understand as burnout. When we are emotionally exhausted, we feel overwhelmed. So kyoa has this connotation of being wearied, being tired, being emotionally exhausted. And compassion is really proposed as one of the most powerful antidote against that form of weariness, emotional exhaustion. And another thing about compassion is that the other day I was, editing a Tibetan a Buddhist text, a Tibetan text, and I was struck by how in that particular text, there were a couple of attributes that are listed as, functions or effects of compassion, which really struck me. And they have a kind of a very modern sounding perspective, which, I'll list some of them, okay? The text talks about how when we are able to bring compassion into our heart, a sense of agency comes in because you feel empowered, because you are now paying attention to a solution rather than the problem alone. It talks about how compassion, because there is no element of deception, there is a very strong sense of honesty when compassion arises. Similarly, compassionate response is very authentic. So authenticity is another important attribute. And also compassion, when we allow compassion to arise, a genuine kindness to arise, there is also a clarity of heart. You don't feel morally kind of ambiguous or confused. There's a kind of a clarity. And another important attribute that was identified was a humility, because when compassion arises for someone, a genuine respect arises for this other person. It's very different from pity. Pity tends to look down, feeling sorry for someone. Compassion involves having a kind of, because it's rooted in a recognition of a shared humanity, there's a respect. So humility is another one. And then also it talks about how compassion, sort of brings a kind of an energy. And that makes perfect sense, because now from scientific research, we know compassion is very closely associated with motivation, because when compassion arises, the action regions of the brain gets activated. And then, of course, so then, compassion also sort of helps us move outside the narrow confines of our own self-imprisonment. So because it opens our heart. So these, I was struck by how, if you look at all of these qualities, they really make sense to then understand why something like compassion makes us more resilient in our mind. Now, modern researchers on resiliency talk about two main attributes of resilience. One is called ego resiliency. So these are studies coming from, childhood studies, as well as a study of spouses who have lost their loved one recently. So grief is a very important part of the state of mind. Then the research identifies two main attributes or characteristics. One is called ego resiliency. The term is an interesting one, but setting aside the choice of the word ego resiliency, but it really refers to the ability to manage and steer through a problem or a challenge and bounce back. So that's one attribute of resiliency. The second one is called hardiness. And this relates to your ability to view problems as a challenge with a sense of not having lost all your control. And there's less element of powerlessness. So those two attributes, if you think about it, compassion is a powerful prophylactic, quality that can buffer you against those kind of, challenges that lack of resiliency brings. So, and the way in which it does is that compassion, and here His Holiness beautifully says that when compassion arises, your inner door opens, and when your inner door opens, it's easier to reach out to someone. And also because you have chosen to open your inner door, there is nothing to hide. So that relationship, the interaction is very transparent because you have no self-agenda. I think this is the way in which compassion really kind of opens the heart and brings in an element of courage. And also because compassion, at the core of compassion, is your connection with another human being in front of you, a loved one or another person. The compassion, nurtures that very important human need, which is connection. And this connection is what gives us ability to cope with difficult challenges. So when we know, for example, when we are going through a tough time, there is nothing more calming than a loved one, listening to us, being empathetic. In some cases, we don't actually need our loved one to fix our problem. We just need them to be there to listen to us and kind of, in some sense, affirm the reality of our suffering, our situation, and be there. So we know that the calming impact of a connection is a powerful one. So it is all of these that compassion really fosters. So, briefly, the point I'm trying to make is that choosing compassion is a really powerful way of making our mind resilient. Because otherwise, to counter against lack of resiliency, you have to look for many specific things as antidotes, whereas compassion acts as this much broader kind of energy. It's almost like kind of preparing and creating more space in our heart to be able to take on more problem, more challenges. And another thing that compassion does is, because when we choose compassion, ultimately, compassion is not just an emotional response. There is a very strong emotional component, no doubt. And that's what drives us. But compassion also brings an attitude that you choose to adopt in a given situation. And then, most importantly, if we take compassion seriously, we can turn compassion into a standpoint, a perspective, if you want, a philosophy of life from which we will relate to the world. And when that happens, it really changes our outlook on the world at a very fundamental level. And when we change the way we see the world, it really impacts the way in which we deal with specific situations and challenges. So instead of looking for, yes, of course, we do need specific solutions in any specific situations, but at the same time, while looking for the specific solution, the smarter thing would be to have a strategy that also creates that larger container, the standpoint, the perspective from which we will see the world, we will relate to the world. And that combination of specific techniques versus, plus this broader container approach is what brings the kind of a resilient mind. And then compassion and the connection with joy, I think there's now a lot more research coming out. The whole, every single study of happiness that you see, well-being that you see, ends up showing that compassion is key. Really, if you are serious about your personal well-being or societal well-being or whatever, compassion is really the key. And I, keep repeating this I had the privilege to be sitting at a very, powerful few days of dialogue between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the proceedings of which came out in a book called The Book of Joy. And a film just came out of it. And by the way, I want to encourage everybody to watch it. It's really, especially during this time when we need any dose of joy we can get. I think just the simple laughter of these two great teachers captured in that film. And apparently the producers of the film have managed to what they call bottle the laughter of the two stages. So you can download the laughter and turn it even into a phone, your mobile ring. But the point is that one of the things that was, very powerful was in one of the sessions, when they were talking about what are the conditions for joy, what are the hindrances to experiencing real joy, what are the key pillars of joy practices. But in the end, both teachers came down to the simple point that if you're serious about joy, you need to be serious about compassion. And joy and genuine joy and happiness is not something that you can consciously seek for its own sake. Joy and happiness will come as a byproduct of living a good life, helping others, tapping into your own natural compassion and bringing kindness into the world, making a difference in someone's life, nurturing your important relationship in your life. So that's where the two teachers really converged. And that is not really surprising from the Buddhist point of view, because compassion is one single virtue, which the Buddha says that when you have it in your hand, all the other virtues come into your hand. So the connection between joy and compassion is an interesting one. And my hunch is, as the current science of social, kind of nature of human beings expands, and this is a new field because it's quite, you have to bring the evolutionary science into this, you have to bring the neuroscience, you also have to bring what is called the social neuroscience, which is studying relationships. And and the science that involves more than one person is more complicated because you cannot bring two people in the same scanner, So the science is evolving, but as we deepen our understanding of what it means to be a social animal, social creature, I have no doubt we will have a lot more insight into the mechanism, into the connection between compassion and happiness, and also the mechanisms by which, compassion really promotes genuine well-being. because there is a recognition in all the major traditions of the world, both secular as well as spiritual, religious, that compassion is very important foundation for our moral life. And compassion is very good for others. And so there is definitely a deep appreciation of the compassion as a foundation for our moral life. But in the traditional teachings, there is little understanding or appreciation of how compassion is even good for ourselves and our own personal well-being. And here, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings are really powerful because he is striving to develop a discourse and language and perspective on compassion that is more universal. And when he says that, if you want to, help someone, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. And if you want yourself to be happy, practice compassion. That really captures a powerful insight. And of course, when compassion arises, then it is completely about the object of your concern. It's the other. It has nothing to do with you. But as a result of experiencing compassion for someone, the benefit and the effect can be felt by ourselves because it is our own experience about someone, our interaction with someone. So the connection between compassion and joy is now increasingly appreciated, and we will get more clarity about what exactly is the mechanism that is promoting this and all of this. So, one of the simple way in which we can understand the connection between compassion and joy is how compassion powerfully fosters a sense of purpose. That, I think, is one simple way in which we can understand the connection between compassion and joy. And when we have a genuine sense of purpose, and then when we see what we do fulfills that purpose, then we feel a genuine sense of joy. And the joy in the sense of not physical sensation of pleasure, but here I'm talking about a deep sense of fulfillment, a satisfaction. It's a mental satisfaction. And that kind of mental satisfaction arises not in a hedonistic sense, but in the sense of a purpose fulfilled. And here we know, for example, like athletes are willing to go to great lengths of physical hardships in their training and all of this. And when they play their sport and they win it, they have a genuine sense of accomplishment. That is what I'm, talking about, this sense of fulfillment or sense of satisfaction. And that can only be found when you have an ability to feel a purpose fulfilled. And there is nothing more powerful than being able to experience a sense of purpose and purpose fulfilled when you are able to bring genuine kindness to someone. And we know that from our own personal experience, even at workplace, when our work is recognized and valued, we feel deeply inspired, more energetic. And when there is joy, we know there's more motivation. There's less tiredness. So the psychology of compassion, purpose, joy, energy, motivation is a complex one, but we know from our own personal experience, they're interconnected because, when we truly love someone, when we truly care for someone, we are willing to do a lot more. We have the ability to endure a lot more hardships as well. The parents will know that, when our children are small and when we have to do everything, and sometimes we, because someone is, a child is teething, and then few nights there is not much sleep for one of the parents at least, and we're willing to endure that, and we do it joyfully. It's physically tiring, but we have the ability to endure and bring a lot more patience, tolerance. That's because there is a purpose. There's joy. So I think, those of us who particularly take compassion seriously, because of compassion's association with, suffering and need and problem, sometimes there is a danger of going too extreme into thinking everything about the darker, the suffering side. But I think it's also important not to forget there is a joy as well. And of course, when we truly engage in a compassionate act, we're not doing it because we want to find that joy at the end. But the joy at the end comes as a byproduct, and there's nothing wrong about experiencing this byproduct as a result of doing good. And this is where sometimes the Western mind struggles a little bit, because there is a kind of a puritanical streak in the Western mind. So you feel that if you're getting something out of it, something is not quite pure. So I think that's a cultural problem. I think, and here part of the problem is coming from confusing two things. One is the motivation for which you do certain act, and then the consequent byproduct of that act. So when you truly do something compassionate to someone, your focus has nothing to do with your self-agenda. You're there responding to a need in front of you. And as a result of making a difference, if you feel satisfied, that is very human, because you wanted to achieve something and you were able to do it, make a difference, and you get a sense of satisfaction. And that sense of satisfaction is a byproduct. So I think, so to sum up, the point I want to make is that, compassion, if we pay more attention, we begin to appreciate not only the power of compassion, but also the complexity of the psychology around it, which is actually quite rich. It's not a simple statement of you should do good, you should be kind to others. It's too simplistic. If we understand the complex psychology of human compassion, then we really begin to understand a way in which we can really tap into our own mind and turn our mind into an ally, not only in respect to helping others, but also kind of, promoting our own personal well-being. So in this way, we can see the close connection between compassion and joy, as well as especially how compassion promotes a resilient mind. And, if we look at in our own personal life, many of the people who are truly compassionate, they're also quite courageous. They're also quite energetic. There are people who really make a difference in the world. So in this way, we can really see the close connection between compassion and resilient mind and joy. So I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to having more explorations in the form of question and answers. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Jinpa. And I wonder, before we start question and answer, would you be willing to guide us through maybe a short practice, compassion practice, and then so we can get a sense of that?
Definitely, thank you. So, so for this, find a comfortable posture, just sort of more a restful, grounded posture that would, with the spine keeping a bit straight, unless you have a medical condition. And straight spine facilitates greater alertness. So you want to adopt a posture that is relaxed, but also promotes alertness. And then let's gather our mind by bringing our attention into our body, feeling particularly the points where we experience contact. And settle your attention there. Or you can choose your breath as an anchor for your attention. Whatever you choose as an anchor, your body or your breath. Now let's try to slow down the energy of our mind through the relaxation of the body. And if it helps, you can also do this by slowing your breathing, just taking a deeper, longer breaths. Now our mind comparatively settled, and having just listened to our discussion of compassion and the courageous mind, the resilient mind, let's be courageous and bring to mind an image of suffering right now. Some of us may be in the unfortunate situation of having someone, a loved one, going through a tough time right now, physical illness, financial difficulty, relationship breakdown. And those of you who are fortunate not to have any loved one in your life going through difficulty, you can choose an image from the world. Right now, there is no shortage of such suffering. Think of all the Syrian refugees who are stuck somewhere in a no man's land. Or people in Afghanistan, particularly women and school girls. Just think about the feeling of uncertainty, fear, powerlessness. And worry. And if you are brave enough, you can imagine what it must be like then. Feeling of confusion, uncertainty, anxiety, fear. And in many cases, feeling alone. So whatever object of concern that you have chosen, the image of suffering, bring that to mind. And then silently say, may you be strong. May you find courage. May you retain your hope. And may you be free from suffering. Repeat these phrases or any phrases that speak to you. May you find courage. May you find hope. May you find relief. May you be free from suffering. And may you be free from fear. You could also imagine bright light rays coming out of your heart and going towards everywhere. sending these wishes. Okay, now you can bring your attention back on your breathing or body, as if returning home. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinpa. It was a beautiful practice.
Thank you.
So we're going to be moving into the Q&A portion of our call. And so we'll be taking live video questions where people will actually be coming on with their video and audio enabled for those of us joining on Zoom. And if you'd like to ask a question live, go ahead and please write your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. It's different than the chat function. So we'll actually be looking in the Q&A function for the question specifically. And at the beginning of your question, please write live in all caps so that we know you have a functioning microphone and camera and that you're wanting to come on live. Then write your name, where you're from, and finally your question. And if we choose your question in about 5 minutes, I'll call your name and then you'll be brought on live right away. So please be ready. A window will pop up at that point asking you to enable your video and microphone, and you'll just click yes, and then you'll be on right away. So over the next few minutes, please go ahead and write in your questions. And as folks are writing in those questions, I'll read a question for you, Jinpa, that Peggy wrote in through our pre-Zoom survey. Peggy asks, how can I stay connected to my sense of compassion when I feel so overwhelmed and disenchanted by the polarization, violence, and crisis we seem to be experiencing globally?
Thank you for the question. This is really, one of the most important questions of our time, actually, challenges of our time. For some reason, the world, in addition to right now a pandemic crisis, is also seem to be going through a particular phase in global politics at the national level, in many different parts of the world, in some kind of highly charged political discourse that is very polarized. And I don't know to what extent this kind of is a result of amplification that social media platforms are offering, and we're hearing it more, or whether we're going through a particular phase in human kind of experience. It's a tough one. But I think those of us who truly care for the fate of the world, we cannot lose hope and we cannot lose compassion. Because even the highly charged, polarized voices that some of them are expressed in very aggressive terms are really coming from, if you dig deeper, it's really coming from a place of pain or an aspiration to see a world or a place in a different way. I mean, so in the end, everybody, if you strip down all the layers of what makes us different, and if you ask a question, and I sometimes say this, even if we happen to have a chance to sit down with a terrorist, and if we ask the person, why is that person doing it? Once you are able to peel off the many layers, we will get to a point where the concerns and aspirations are pretty much the same. They want a world their children will be loved. They want to feel safer. They want respect. They want their dignity to be respected. So those of us who take compassion seriously, we cannot give up because there is such an amplification of the polarized discourse. So if anything, that awareness should even strengthen our dedication to use compassion as a primary lens to look at them. My own sense is, I mean, this is my personal opinion, part of the polarization in the political discourse is happening partly because when the globalization began to take off, when many of the manufacturing jobs were outsourced, many parts of the world did not pay full attention to what the economic consequences of this kind of globalization is going to be and what needs to be done to redress those that will be disproportionately affected by these kind of massive structural changes in the economic practice. And part of the resentment and many of these things we're seeing in the world is partly a result of that. And I hope it's not just because of the social media, and social media is playing a role definitely in amplifying the aggressive tone and the discourse and echo chambers and all the rest. But there is an underlying a reason which is deeper, and that is ultimately an unfair economic systems that is being spreading as a result of sort of globalization. Globalization in itself is nothing wrong because that's the direction the world is moving anyway. But there are aspects of the globalization which affects disproportionately certain sectors of the society, economic sectors of the society. And that I don't think was taken into account seriously enough. And what we are seeing now is a sort of a call for redress of that.
Thank you for that, Jinpa. Okay, it looks like we have our first live questioners coming in. So let's see who we have first. So our first question is going to be, sorry, they're typing to me as we go. I think it looks like it's live from Sierra. Sierra, we're gonna be taking your question in just a second. When the message pops up asking you to enable your audio and video, click yes, and then you'll be on live with us in just a moment. It looks like Sierra is a healthcare worker and has a question in regards to her. There she is. We see your photos popped up.
Oh.
Hi, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much. And hello, Dr. Jinpa. It's been wonderful to hear you speak today.
Thank you.
My question, as you can see, I'm in a healthcare setting. I'm an acupuncturist at a mental health clinic that treats severe mental health cases. And myself and my colleagues, therapists, are all feeling the effects of the increase in struggle and suffering. It's our job to be compassionate with our patients and then again at home with our loved ones. So my question is how to prevent that emotional burnout so that we can sustain that compassion on the long term without emotionally burning out ourselves.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my deep admiration to what you're doing and appreciation, because one of the very important consequences of the pandemic long isolation is really going to be felt in the mental health and mental well-being domain. So this is one area where I think a lot of people will need help. So healthcare professionals like yourself will have a very important role to play. I think one of the important things that I think, those like you whose day-to-day work involves, exposure to suffering on an ongoing basis. I think we are not designed to be able to do that on a sustained, ongoing basis. We're not designed. I mean, we are designed to be able to respond to crisis and help and then move on. So the profession that requires that ongoing, constant exposure to acute suffering then I think it would be helpful to have some mental skills that you can adopt. And one of which would be the ability to switch off when you can. So like once you finish your work, then, so it's difficult because we are emotional creatures. We bring, carry over impacts of our experience, So, we cannot just, we are not a machine where we can just switch it on and off. But as much as possible, if you can, and part of that may be kind of adopting a certain ritual, like when you finish the day, instead of immediately closing the door and walking out, just taking a time, maybe 5 minutes, sitting down on your desk, breathing, and just debriefing yourself, okay? And then having a closure of that day so that you don't have to carry it over into your home space. So that I think is an important one. But on the other hand, many people working in the mental health domain don't have that luxury because you need to be available when emergency pops up. But otherwise, if you can learn, that I think is a very important one, because when you carry over, that weighs heavily. So that's one important thing. And then the second thing is, now with new research coming on from neuroscience and clinical science on the distinction between empathy and compassion, that I think has an important implication, because empathy is really has a much stronger emotional content, and whereas compassion has a more motivational agency as part of it. So as much as possible, if you can move from empathy to compassion quickly, but you cannot, it's not a good idea to switch off. Some people just switch off the empathy. But if you switch off empathy, you are suppressing your emotional response. And suppression in the long run doesn't really work. And in fact, depersonalization is recognized now as one of the 3 major factors that give rise to burnout, the other being emotional exhaustion, and then the third being powerlessness. So suppression of empathy is not the way to go. So you allow your empathic response to kick in, but then immediately find a way to channel it into compassionate response of helping, through vocalization or reaching out or being listening or whatever that you can do. So those 2 things can really be quite effective. And then the third thing is, every now and then, I think some type of self-calming techniques, through mindfulness practice. So between 2 patients, if you immediately jumping onto the next one, if you take a minute or 2, kind of, just, and if there's no space, you can even go to the bathroom and do it in the bathroom, just finding that break, being able to, sort of reconnect, ground yourself. Those are important skills that can really help. And then every now and then, sort of, maybe in the morning, I think this reconnecting with your intention, because you are there to help, you are there to serve. And that broader embracing of the motivation to help and serve is going to be setting the tone for the day. I think these are ways in which I think you can, because, I mean, some people maybe, but very few of us are superhumans. So we are vulnerable and fragile like everybody else. So I think just finding those self-care skills it can be really effective. And then also, and you're not doing it just for yourself. You're doing it because you can be more fully available for the next person who is going to be seeking your help. So it's actually ultimately altruistic for taking care of yourself so that you don't burn out. Because, right now, I mean, one of my close family members has just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And now we are struggling with, what does it mean? How do we build a structure? Because we also don't want to get burned out in the process. And that sort of giving a forethought of, preparing and sort of expecting certain things to happen. So when certain things happen, it doesn't come as a shock. So those kind of creating a more spacious mental space really make a huge difference.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like our next question is from Kevin in the UK. Kevin, if you're hearing this, we'll be bringing you on now. So press OK to enable your video and audio, and you'll be on in just a moment. There should be a little box that pops up that asks you to enable video and audio, and then you click yes. See, looks like Kevin's here with us. Kevin, we can see you, but you're still muted. And it looks like your videos hasn't started quite yet. Kevin, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but if you unmute your audio, or if someone on the team can help Kevin get going. Let's see. All right, maybe we'll read another question that's come in while we're waiting for Kevin to get all set up. Let's see, or it looks like I'm going to go ahead and read the question for Kevin. Oh, okay. No, I'm going on to Diane. Sorry, I'm getting notes from the team about how to deal with the technological setback. Okay, so we're going to take Diane, who's tuning in from Mississippi. So Diane, if you're hearing this, you'll see a pop-up box. Go ahead and click yes when it asks you to enable your video and audio, and we'll start with your question first. Okay, looks like Diane's on, and Diane, similarly, go ahead and unmute yourself. There you are. Hi, Diane, welcome.
Hi there, thanks so much. Dr. Jinpa, thank you so much for your work and your vocation. It's such important. Thank you so much. I'm a therapist and an ordained Methodist minister. And in these times of COVID, I just feel like there is so much unresolved grief. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about the best ways for us to handle this for ourselves as individuals, but also ways for us to help others in our sphere of influence, in our families, in our communities, in our places of work and service.
Thank you for the question. I think in this particular period, especially because of the prolonged isolation, I think pastors and community leaders and church leaders can really play a very important role, because we know from studies, one of the most effective ways of promoting mental well-being is really kind of a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And feeling part of a community and feeling that you have a good support network, that people you can talk to. So, of course, we're still in the COVID period, so protection needs to be taken, and hopefully a majority of the people who have taken vaccinations and all the rest. But I think as much as possible, if you can, even if it is through Zoom, just holding community spaces, making people feel connected, creating a safe space where people can share each other's struggles, because often when we are experiencing suffering, the thing that makes it very unbearable is the feeling that we're alone. Mm-hmm. And then, so there is something very powerful about hearing that same struggle from someone else, because it makes you feel less alone. Mm-hmm. And when you feel less alone, it takes the edge away. Mm-hmm. And it becomes that much more manageable, that much more endurable. So, and this is very human. I mean, we kind of know this through common sense, but sometimes we don't make the effort to reach out. And particularly in the West, where we prize autonomy so much, and we don't want to bother someone, We don't want to burden someone. And then this kind of dance of not wanting to bother each other prevents that the need of the social connection, which can be really powerful buffer against loneliness. So I think that would be really helpful. And I think people also need an outlet to really share their frustration, share their, pain in a space that is safe, where others will not judge, where others will also be open about their vulnerability. And this is where the church communities is really a beautiful place, because you have a natural community, and the fact that members of the church group already have a sense of belonging. So there is a kind of a shared trust among them. So I think that way, in some ways, in dealing with isolation and loneliness, people who have faith, people who are part of a religious community, in some ways have more advantage, because they have something beyond the immediate family circles. Whereas if you're not part of a faith community, then you are relying on your friends. And then the support system beyond the family becomes more informal. Whereas the church, if you're part of a community of a church, then there is a more formal structure beyond your immediate family. So now is the time to really tap into that and really kind of, and not just for your own well-being and benefit, but also you are a member whose presence and interaction with others can help others as well. So it's the benefit goes both ways. And just recognizing that would really help. And someone like yourself can really play that catalyzing role to inviting, to creating that space, to helping people open up, to really kind of, do a peer-to-peer support and encouragement kind of approach. That would be really powerful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Diane. So it looks like we're just about out of time as the hour's approaching. And so I would love to still, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to bring Kevin on, but I'd love to still be able to read his question. But
sure.
Jinpa, I'd mentioned to everyone that we'd have a moment to hear about your upcoming course. And I think it'd be really wonderful to take a moment to do that. And then would you have a few more minutes to go?
Let's look at Kevin's question. Yeah.
Kevin's question.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, because some people might have to drop off at the hour.
Okay. Sure.
Nice to just share a little bit.
Thank you. So the course is a 6-part course that I developed specifically for broader audience, and also as a way of introducing people to the 8-week formal CCT course, which is a bit more time demanding. And this 8-week CCT course is 2 hours a class over a period of 8 weeks, whereas the 6-part course is a self-paced cohort system that can be done in 2 weeks. And in this 6-part course, what I've tried to do is to really sort of present in very clear kind of, language, how can we understand compassion? What is the nature, and how can we identify it within ourselves? And the connection between compassion and happiness is the first lesson. And then the second lesson is really more about how compassion shows up in our life, everyday life. Sometimes compassion shows up from us to someone else. In that case, kindness, and we become the source for that. Sometimes we experience it from others, then we become the recipient. And then sometimes we need compassion directed towards ourselves. So it's a self-to-self compassion. So those 3 modes of ways in which compassion gets expressed and felt, the second lesson. Third is the resistances and fear that we bring to compassion. So although compassion is a natural human quality, it's powerful, but sometimes we bring resistance in the form of saying, some people will think compassion is weak. So if I am too compassionate, people will take advantage of me, or sometimes we bring cultural resistances. So that's lesson 3. And then lesson 4 is where I dig deeper into the definition of compassion, what it means, what are the key elements and components that make up. And then lesson 5 is the idea of how can we train compassion. So the compassion training is introduced. And then the final lesson, lesson 6, is where we then distill everything into a kind of a practical steps on learning how to make compassion an active force in our everyday life. So in this way, the course really captures the full psychology of compassion, as well as the ways in which we can think about making it more intentional and real in our everyday life. So that is, and it's designed as a core system. So there is a peer-to-peer sharing during the period of the 2 weeks when you are going through the 6-part kind of in your own speed. And we culminate with a live Q&A session with me. So that in a nutshell is a description.
Yeah, thank you, Jinpa. I so appreciate the course that you've made, and also the generous intention that you've made it with, and particularly just appreciating adapting it into the 2-week course, which is so accessible for people, and then also the sliding scale model that you've chosen to do that also makes it financially accessible for folks, and the focus on community through the cohort model, where people are really doing the program together. So I encourage anyone who's interested in going deeper into their study of compassion or with Jinpa to check out the course. We'll be linking to that in the comments in the Zoom and on YouTube, and we'll also make sure to send out an email with that afterwards. But if you're wanting to check it out, I recommend clicking the link, because when we close the Zoom in a few minutes, that link will disappear. And I believe you've had several cohorts start already that filled up and were quite successful. And so I think the next cohort starts in just about 5 days on October 25th. So that's an opportunity to join a group that'll be doing it. And then there'll also be one on November 30th. So again, if you're interested in that, there'll be links posted on the side there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jinpa.
Yeah.
So now to Kevin's question. Sorry we weren't able to bring you on, Kevin, but I'll go ahead and read your question for you now. Kevin asks, often it seems easier to feel compassion to others than oneself. Why is this compassion for self so hard?
This is a good question, actually, very insightful too. I would argue that this is not surprising, because if we take seriously the scientific insight that we are deeply social creatures, then when we are growing up as a child, the social development is very crucial. And in fact, we know from child developmental psychologists that the child's early stages of identity is very intertwined with the caregiver, particularly the mother. And this child's individuation as a separate creature comes a bit later. At the same time, right from the beginning, for survival's sake, child's bond and affection and attachment to the caregiver, particularly the mother, is so fundamental to the lived experience of the child. So I would argue between self-compassion and compassion for others is more fundamental. So that's why I think in some ways it's easier, because compassion is, by its very definition, about others. But self-compassion is necessary because at the heart of self-compassion is the issue of self-to-self relationship. So self-compassion is, in other words, what we are learning to do in self-compassion is to turn the things like impulse to reach out, impulse to be kind, impulse to be understanding, non-judgmental, and accepting that we bring to a loved one, especially to a child, naturally. What we are doing in self-compassion practices, now we are learning to turn these and apply to ourselves, our own situation. Bring more kindness, less harshness, more understanding, less judgment. So that's why I think it's tough. And particularly in the West, not just in the West, in the contemporary kind of highly competitive, affluent society, we also have to rise against the tide of having internalized a self-to-self relationship that is quite hard, because we are highly competitive, we are evaluated, we are judged, and we strive to perform according to a certain criteria. So now having to let go of that and bring another way of dealing with self and relating to self is a tough one. But I think in the end, having that balance right, where you have a certain discipline when it comes to your own sense of self, but at the same time being able to create a space where you can bring kindness and acceptance and non-judgment to yourself really makes a big difference, because research is beginning to show that actually ability for self-compassion is also a very important part of being resilient. Because if you don't have a healthy self-to-self relationship, then the potential for burnout is higher. Whereas if you have a healthy self-to-self relationship, then the potential for greater resilience is there. And my own sense is it's partly a function of self-awareness as well. Because if you're bringing more compassion to yourself, you have greater self-awareness because you know what your limits are. You recognize your weaknesses, your strengths. And then if you're beginning to feel burned out, you create the boundary, you take a step back and you re-energize, revitalize yourself. So I think in a nutshell, it is not surprising that bringing compassion to oneself is harder than bringing compassion for others, because bringing compassion for others is much more fundamental as part of our social reality.
Thank you, Jinpa. And thank you for staying on a little bit longer with us. I see some people have taken your course and are typing nice things in the chat. So that's nice
Wonderful.
to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Do spread the word, because I really feel the more people can, sort of be exposed to this course, the more they will be able to bring these kind of insights and ideas and practices in everyday life. And then, we are not, each of us is not an island. So we're all interconnected, and, whatever we learn and embody affects the people around us, particularly the loved ones. So the benefits will be shared much more widely.
Oh, and I realized for those that are watching this recording later, you won't see the Zoom chat. So we'll put a button under the recording page. You'll see a button that'll take you directly to the course page so you can learn about it there as well. And I just wanted to thank everyone for showing up today, for practicing together, and for everyone who asked their questions, whether we were able to share them live or not, and for coming together and exploring how we can bring more compassion into our lives. Of course, Jinpa, thank you so much for sharing your big heart and wisdom with us today. And are there any final words you'd like to leave us with before we close?
Well, thank you all for coming together and being part of this conversation this evening. And please spread the word. And also, to continue to sort of nurture your passion for compassion, because this is one thing that we can bring, sort of joy, not only in our own personal life, but also it's a powerful way in which we can show up in the world and make a difference in the world, through the lens of compassion. And finally, once again, thank you, Kaylee, Megan, and Stephen, for your help, and for the Awake Network for hosting this. And thank you, my own Compassion Institute team, Stephen and Julie, who are here in this Zoom room as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinpa. Thank you to everyone. And I love that phrase that you ended on, passion for compassion.